The lab equipment hummed softly as Lyra adjusted the holographic disguise embedded in her skin cells. The mirror reflected what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary human woman with violet eyes, a feature she'd insisted on keeping despite her research team's concerns about authenticity. Her silver blonde hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her pale skin seemed to shimmer slightly in certain lights, another compromise between her natural luminen appearance and human camouflage. Appearance modification complete, she recorded into her wrist communicator. Day 1 of Earth observation commencing. Lyra had spent 3 cycles studying human language and customs from afar, but nothing prepared her for the sensory overload of actually being on Earth. The university campus buzzed with activity, students lounging on grassy areas, the scent of coffee wafting from nearby buildings, and the curious ritual of people pressing their mouths together that her studies had identified as kissing. This last observation particularly perplexed her. On Lumina, bonding was cerebral and practical, partnerships formed to advance knowledge or combine complementary skills. The concept of physical affection for pleasure remained theoretically interesting but practically baffling. "Excuse me," a deep voice interrupted her thoughts. "You must be Dr. Lyra Nova, the visiting astrophysicist?" Turning, Lyra found herself face to face with a tall human male with warm brown skin and curious eyes that reminded her of the amber crystals from her homeworld's caves. Her research had prepared her for the proper greeting protocol. "Yes, that is my designation, I mean, my name." She extended her hand stiffly. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance." The man smiled, his expression warming his entire face as he took her hand. An unexpected sensation traveled up her arm, a tingling warmth that her studies hadn't mentioned. "Professor Elijah Bennett, Astronomy Department. I've been asked to show you around." His handshake lingered a moment longer than necessary before releasing. "Your paper on quantum gravitational anomalies was brilliant. Not many people approach black hole theory from that angle." Lyra relaxed slightly. Science was familiar territory. "Thank you. It was merely an application of standard principles she caught herself, that I've been developing for some time." As Elijah guided her through the campus, Lyra found herself studying him rather than her surroundings. The way sunlight highlighted subtle red undertones in his closely cropped dark hair. The precise way he gestured in explaining the history of the observatory. The curious sensation that returned whenever their shoulders accidentally brushed. "And this will be your office during your stay," Elijah said, opening a door to a small but pleasant room with large windows overlooking a grove of trees. "It's not much, but the view is fantastic. On clear nights, you can actually see the Pleiades cluster from here without a telescope." "It's perfect," Lyra responded, genuinely pleased. In my home country, we have a special appreciation for the Pleiades." "Really? There's a meteor shower predicted this weekend. A few of us faculty usually camp out at Clearwater Lake to watch. You should join us." The invitation triggered Lyra's mental checklist of human social protocols. An offer of shared experience indicated potential friendship development, an essential component of her research. "I would like that," she replied, surprising herself with how true the statement felt. As Elijah left, promising to return later to escort her to the faculty lunch, Lyra activated her communicator. Day 1 observations. Humans appear to form connections far more rapidly than anticipated. Subject Elijah Bennett demonstrates unexpected knowledge compatibility. Physical proximity produces anomalous biological responses requiring further study. Research parameters may need adjustment. She looked out the window at the alien blue sky and, for the first time since arriving on Earth, felt a flutter of something that wasn't scientific curiosity. Something that, had she been human, she might have recognized as anticipation. The faculty dining hall buzzed with conversation as Elijah guided Lyra between tables. 3 days had passed since her arrival, and despite her extensive preparation, Earth customs continued to baffle her. She watched with fascination as humans engaged in the ritual of small talk, conversations with seemingly no informational purpose. Dr. Kira Matthews, this is Dr. Lyra Nova, visiting from. Elijah paused, realizing Lyra had never specified her home institution. The Northern Lumina Institute, Lyra supplied quickly, referencing the cover story her mission handlers had crafted. It is a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Matthews. Kira, a cheerful astrophysicist with bright red hair, extended her hand. Just Kira is fine. Elijah mentioned you're joining us for the meteor shower this weekend? Yes. I find the phenomenon of space debris burning in your atmosphere quite beautiful, Lyra replied earnestly. Kira laughed. That's certainly one way to describe it. Most people just say, pretty lights in the sky. As lunch progressed, Lyra observed the intricate dance of human interaction, the laughing at statements that weren't factually amusing, the casual touches on shoulders, the way Elijah's eyes crinkled when he smiled. Her mission was to study human mating rituals, but she found herself increasingly distracted by Elijah himself. You're staring again, he whispered as they left the dining hall. I apologize. On my home, in my country, extended eye contact indicates attentiveness rather than rudeness. I didn't say I minded, Elijah replied with a smile that triggered that same curious warmth in Lyra's modified human form. Later that evening, Lyra joined Elijah in his lab to review telescope data. The proximity of his workspace to hers provided an excellent opportunity for observation. Your techniques for analyzing stellar spectra are unusual, he noted, watching her work. I've never seen anyone approach it quite that way. Is it incorrect? She asked, suddenly concerned her otherworldly knowledge had revealed too much. Not at all, it's brilliant. You're identifying patterns I never would have noticed. His genuine admiration made something flutter inside her chest, an anatomical impossibility she would need to analyze later. As they worked side by side, their hands occasionally brushed, sending jolts of awareness through Lyra that her training hadn't prepared her for. When Elijah reached past her to adjust a dial, the scent of his skin, a complex mixture of what she'd learned humans called cologne, and his natural biochemistry, momentarily hijacked her thought processes. Are you all right? He asked. You went completely still. I am experiencing a minor malfunction, I'm a bit tired, she corrected hastily. My body is still adjusting to Earth's day-night cycle. We could take a break, Elijah suggested. The cafeteria makes excellent hot chocolate. The sweet beverage was a revelation, rich, warm, and triggering pleasure responses Lyra had never experienced. Seated across from Elijah in the nearly empty cafeteria, watching snowflakes begin to fall outside, she felt an unfamiliar contentment. In my culture, she ventured carefully, we rarely consume substances purely for pleasure. It's considered inefficient. That sounds like a pretty joyless existence, Elijah replied, his expression softening. Some of the best things in life have no purpose beyond making us happy. Like meteor showers? She asked. Exactly like meteor showers. His smile reached his eyes, creating tiny lines at the corners that Lyra found herself wanting to trace with her fingertips, an impulse so foreign that it startled her. The next day brought new challenges. A faculty reception introduced Lyra to the baffling custom of cocktail parties. She observed humans becoming progressively louder and less inhibited as they consumed alcohol, their physical proximity increasing with each drink. You're not drinking, Elijah noted, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of sparkling water. My physiology, my medical condition makes alcohol inadvisable, she explained, gratefully accepting the alternative. You're not drinking either. I'm driving tonight, he said, then added more quietly, plus, I wanted to keep you company. You looked uncomfortable. His thoughtfulness created a warm sensation in her chest that her research hadn't documented. As the evening progressed, she found herself mimicking human behaviors more naturally, laughing at jokes, engaging in small talk, even initiating a farewell embrace with Kira that felt surprisingly pleasant. Walking to the parking lot after the reception, Elijah's hand accidentally brushed against hers in the darkness. Instead of pulling away, Lyra found herself wondering what would happen if their fingers intertwined, another human custom she'd observed but not experienced. "You're adapting well," Elijah said as they reached his car. "For someone new to the country, you're picking up our customs quickly." "I have an excellent teacher," Lyra replied, realizing with a start that her mission parameters were becoming increasingly irrelevant compared to the time spent with Elijah. Later that night, she recorded her daily observations. Human connections appear to form through shared experiences rather than logical compatibility. Subject Elijah Bennett demonstrates unexpected kindness that produces anomalous responses in observer. Recommend extending research timeline to fully document these phenomena. What she didn't record was how the thought of this extension made her feel, a sensation that, had she been fully human, she might have recognized as hope. The night of the meteor shower arrived with perfect clarity, stars scattered across the velvet sky like luminescent dust. Lyra stood at the edge of Clearwater Lake, her breath creating small clouds in the crisp autumn air. Around her, faculty members set up telescopes and unfolded camping chairs, their excitement palpable even to someone unfamiliar with human emotions. "First time camping?" Elijah appeared beside her, offering a thermal jacket that looked far warmer than her standard university attire. "Is it that obvious?" she asked, slipping into the jacket and immediately appreciating the way it captured and intensified her body heat, a clever human innovation. "You've been staring at the tent like it might bite you," he teased, his smile illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns around the campsite. Lyra had studied Earth's wildlife extensively. "Tents are not predatory species," she stated with certainty before recognizing the humor in his eyes. "Ah, you're joking." Their laughter mingled in the night air, creating a strange intimacy that Lyra found herself leaning into rather than analyzing. Over the past 2 weeks, her research notes had become increasingly focused on Elijah rather than humans in general, a methodological flaw she couldn't bring herself to correct. As darkness deepened, the group settled around a campfire. Professor Kira passed around containers of S-More's ingredients, another human ritual involving the deliberate burning of food that Lyra found fascinating. Elijah demonstrated the proper technique, guiding her hands as she held a marshmallow over the flames. "Not too close," he murmured, his chest warm against her back as he adjusted her grip on the stick. "You want it golden, not charred." The physical proximity triggered a cascade of responses, elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, and a curious warmth spreading through her modified human form. On Lumina, such reactions would indicate malfunction. On Earth, surrounded by the crackling fire and Elijah's gentle guidance, they felt strangely right. "First meteor," someone called out, and all heads tilted skyward. The streak of light across the darkness drew gasps of appreciation. Soon more followed, brilliant flashes that reminded Lyra of the crystalline rains on her home world. Without thinking, she reached for Elijah's hand, intertwining their fingers as she'd seen other humans do. He squeezed gently in response, the simple gesture communicating more than words could. "Make a wish," Elijah whispered as a particularly bright meteor blazed across the horizon. "Why would atmospheric phenomena grant desires?" Lyra asked, genuinely curious. His laugh was soft, intimate. "It's just tradition. Something about witnessing something rare and beautiful makes us want to mark the moment with hope." Hope. The concept existed on Lumina as a statistical calculation, the probability of favorable outcomes. Here, under Earth's star-filled sky, it felt like something entirely different, something warm and expansive that made her synthetic heart beat faster. "Then I wish." She began, but stopped herself. Speaking the wish seemed dangerous, not because it wouldn't come true as human superstition suggested, but because acknowledging it would make her mission even more complicated than it had already become. The display continued above them, but Lyra found herself increasingly distracted by the man beside her, the way firelight played across his features, the gentle pressure of his thumb tracing circles on her hand, the comfortable silence between them that required no analysis. When the group eventually drifted toward their tents, Elijah walked Lyra to the one they'd set up for her earlier. "Need any help figuring out the sleeping bag?" he offered. "I believe I can manage the technology," she replied with newfound confidence, then hesitated. "Elijah, I've observed that humans often express gratitude through physical gestures." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Such as?" "The pressing together of lips. Kissing." The word felt strange on her tongue, scientific yet somehow charged with meaning. For a moment, he simply looked at her, the intensity in his eyes making her wonder if she'd misunderstood some crucial social cue. Then he stepped closer, one hand gently cupping her cheek. "Are you asking me to kiss you, Lyra?" "I'm expressing scientific curiosity," she whispered, though even to her own ears, the explanation sounded hollow. "Very scientific," he murmured, leaning closer until his breath warmed her lips. "Just tell me to stop if..." The rest of his sentence dissolved as their lips met. Lyra had prepared extensively for her Earth mission, studied language, customs, even modified her biology to appear human, but nothing had prepared her for this. The sensation cascaded through her system like a solar flare, overwhelming and brilliant. Her hands found their way to his shoulders, steadying herself against the unexpected intensity. When they finally separated, Elijah looked as stunned as she felt. "That was an effective expression of gratitude?" Lyra suggested, her voice uncharacteristically unsteady. His laugh was soft, almost reverent. "If that's gratitude, I'd like to see enthusiasm." Later, alone in her tent, Lyra activated her communicator with trembling fingers. Research log, Day 17. Human bonding rituals appear to trigger physiological responses indistinguishable from system malfunctions. Subject Elijah Bennett. She paused, struggling for scientific objectivity. Subject Elijah has ceased to be merely a research subject. She touched her lips, where the sensation of his kiss lingered like a phantom. Mission parameters require substantial revision. The observer has become compromised. As she drifted toward sleep, watching the occasional meteor still streaking across the sky through her tent's mesh window, Lyra realized she had made a wish after all, one that had nothing to do with science and everything to do with the unfamiliar, wonderful ache blooming in her chest whenever Elijah smiled at her. A feeling that, had she been entirely human, she would have recognized without hesitation as falling in love. Autumn leaves spiraled down from campus trees as Lyra walked briskly toward the astronomy building. 6 weeks into her Earth mission, she'd found herself increasingly torn between duty and desire. Her daily research transmissions to Lumina had grown shorter, vaguer, focusing on general observations rather than the truth. She was falling in love with an Earthling. Since the night of the meteor shower 3 weeks ago, everything had changed. What began as simple observation had evolved into something far more complex. She and Elijah had shared more kisses, each one sending cascades of sensation through her modified form that her people's science couldn't explain. They'd spent evenings stargazing, his hand warm in hers as he pointed out constellations she'd actually visited but pretended to be learning about for the first time. Today was different, though. Today she'd received a transmission from her superiors, mission termination imminent. Prepare for extraction within 7 Earth rotations. 7 days. The thought of leaving felt like a physical pain, another new sensation Earth had taught her. She needed to tell Elijah the truth before she departed, regardless of the consequences. "You look like you're plotting the end of the world," Kira remarked, falling into step beside her. "Everything okay with you and Elijah?" Lyra attempted a human smile. "We're fine. I just received news from home that's complicated." Ah, the dreaded going back home conversation. Kira nodded sympathetically. No one likes long-distance relationships, but you two seem solid. I'm sure you'll figure it out. If only it were that simple. The distance between Earth and Lumina wasn't measured in miles but in light-years. In Elijah's lab, she found him hunched over a curious device she hadn't seen before. "What is that?" she asked, momentarily distracted from her purpose. "Spectral analyzer with some modifications I've been working on," he replied without looking up. "It can detect atmospheric composition at distances where conventional equipment fails." He finally glanced up, his smile faltering when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" "I need to speak with you. Privately." Elijah's eyes searched hers before he nodded, turning to his research assistant. "Miguel, can you finish calibrating this? Dr. Nova and I need to step out." They walked in silence to Elijah's office, tension building with every step. Once inside, Lyra paced while Elijah leaned against his desk, concern etched on his features. "I've been dishonest with you," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "My research here isn't what I claimed." "You're not really an astrophysicist?" He looked skeptical. "I am, but not from any institution you know." She took a deep breath. "I'm not from Earth, Elijah." His expression shifted from concern to confusion. "What do you mean, not from Earth?" "I come from a planet called Lumina in what you would call the Andromeda Galaxy. I was sent to study human relationships, particularly romantic bonding." The words tumbled out now, unstoppable. "My appearance, this body, it's a biological modification designed to blend in with humans." She expected disbelief, anger, perhaps even fear. Instead, Elijah simply stared, his scientist's mind visibly processing her revelation. "That's not possible," he finally said, though his tone lacked conviction. "It explains many things, doesn't it? My unusual approaches to physics. My confusion about simple human customs." She stepped closer. "The way I stared at you that first day because I'd never experienced attraction before." Elijah ran a hand over his face. "If this is a joke." "It's not." Lyra hesitated, then reached for her wrist communicator, disabling the appearance modifier that maintained her human disguise. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her skin took on a faint luminescence, tiny patterns like constellations appearing across her exposed arms. Her violet eyes now had a subtle glow, pupils adjusting to a slightly different shape. Elijah stumbled back, knocking papers from his desk. "Jesus," he whispered. "You're actually an alien, yes." She reactivated her disguise, returning to her human appearance. "I'm still the same person you've known these past weeks. I just come from further away than I claimed." He sank into his chair, eyes never leaving her face. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I've been ordered to return home. 7 days from now." Her voice caught. "And because what's happened between us was never part of my mission parameters. It was unexpected." "Real." "Real," he repeated, the word hanging between them. "So all this time, you've been studying me like a lab specimen?" The hurt in his voice cut deeper than Lyra had anticipated. "At first, yes. But something changed." "I changed." She knelt before him, taking his hands tentatively. "On my world, we don't experience emotions the way humans do. Everything is measured, calculated. Being with you, I've felt things I didn't know were possible." "Things like what?" His voice was barely audible. "Longing. Joy. Desire." She met his eyes steadily. "Love." The silence that followed seemed endless. Outside, students passed by the window, oblivious to the interstellar drama unfolding inside the office. Finally, Elijah squeezed her hands. "I should be terrified. Or thinking you're insane." A shaky laugh escaped him. Instead, I'm sitting here thinking that finally, the universe makes sense. What do you mean? From the moment I met you, something felt different, like you were seeing the world through completely new eyes. Now I understand why. He studied her face intently. Can I see you again? The real you? With trembling fingers, Lyra once more deactivated her disguise, allowing her true nature to shine through the human veneer. This time, Elijah didn't back away. Instead, he reached out, gently tracing the constellation-like patterns on her skin. Beautiful, he whispered, the word carrying a reverence that made her synthetic heart constrict. So the woman I've been falling in love with is literally a star girl. Against all probability, a laugh bubbled up from Lyra's chest, another human reaction she'd acquired during her time on Earth. That's quite an unscientific description. Science seems inadequate right now. His fingers intertwined with hers, the simple gesture bridging galaxies. 7 days, huh? 7 days, she confirmed, the reality of their impossible situation settling between them like a physical weight. Elijah's jaw set with determination, a look she'd seen when he tackled particularly challenging equations. Then we'd better make them count. Outside, the autumn sun broke through clouds, casting golden light across the office, illuminating two figures from different worlds, holding hands across an impossible divide. In that moment, Lyra understood something her research had never revealed. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries weren't made in laboratories or through careful observation, but in the unpredictable, wonderful chaos of the human heart. The 7 days passed in a blur of intensity that Lyra could never have prepared for. Each moment with Elijah felt precious, weighted with the knowledge of their impending separation. They spent nights at the observatory, her true knowledge of distant star systems no longer hidden as she pointed out her home galaxy, describing the crystalline spires of luminous cities and the quantum technology that had brought her across vast interstellar distances. By day, they walked through autumn forests ablaze with colors that didn't exist on her monochromatic homeworld. Elijah watched with delight as she marveled at simple earth pleasures, the taste of cinnamon, the sound of rainfall, the sensation of cool grass beneath bare feet. I wish I could show you my world, she told him as they lay beneath a maple tree, its red leaves drifting down around them like gentle flames. Though after experiencing Earth's diversity, you might find it sterile. I'd still want to see it, Elijah said, propping himself up on one elbow to gaze at her. With no one else around, she deactivated her disguise, allowing her luminescent skin to shimmer in the dappled sunlight. Because it's part of you. On their 6th night, they sat on the roof of the astronomy building, a forbidden area that Elijah had access to as department head. The city lights spread below them, mirroring the stars above in a way that made the boundary between earth and sky seem permeable, possible to cross. I've been thinking, Elijah said, his voice carefully measured in a way that told Lyra he'd been rehearsing this conversation. About tomorrow. Tomorrow. The extraction. The end. I have a proposition, he continued when she remained silent. Take me with you. The request sent a shock through her system. Elijah, it's not possible? You traveled between galaxies. Surely one human passenger isn't beyond your technology. Lyra took his hands, allowing her natural luminescence to brighten slightly, an expression of emotion from her world. It's not the technology that's the limitation. Earth humans aren't adapted for luminous atmosphere, gravity, or radiation levels. You couldn't survive there without extensive biological modification. Then modify me, he said simply. Like they modified you to survive here. The process is invasive. Painful. And even then, you would never be accepted by my people. They consider emotions a weakness, a primitive trait. What we have. She squeezed his hands. They would see it as contamination. His face fell, the hope that had animated his features dimming like a star going nova. So this is it? You just disappear tomorrow and we pretend none of this happened? I could never pretend that. The emotion in her voice surprised even her, another gift from Earth she would carry back to Lumina. But there might be another way. On the morning of the 7th day, Lyra stood in the small clearing where her extraction was scheduled. Elijah waited nearby, their goodbye already exchanged in private hours earlier, a tangle of whispered promises, desperate kisses, and tears Lyra hadn't known she could produce. As the air began to shimmer with the distinctive distortion of a dimensional portal, Lyra activated her communicator one last time. Final mission report, she stated clearly, knowing her superiors would be monitoring. Earth research complete. Requesting immediate extraction with one modification to original parameters. She took a deep breath. I wish to serve as permanent Earth liaison rather than return to Lumina. The portal stabilized, the familiar silhouette of a Luminan extraction officer appearing in its center. Request denied, came the immediate response, the emotionless voice typical of her people. Return for debriefing and reassignment. With respect, Lyra continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart, my research indicates that continued observation is essential. Earth humans form connections that significantly impact their scientific productivity. My effectiveness as a researcher has been enhanced by these connections. She glanced at Elijah. To sever them would compromise valuable data collection. A long silence followed, during which the portal wavered slightly. Finally, temporary extension granted pending full review. 6 Earth months. Regular transmissions required. The portal collapsed, leaving behind only a scorch mark on the forest floor and the lingering scent of ozone. Lyra stood frozen, processing what had just happened. Elijah approached cautiously. Did they just agree? Temporarily, she clarified, turning to him with a smile that felt wonderfully, perfectly human. 6 months to prove that our connection has scientific value. And does it? He asked, pulling her into his arms. Lyra's laugh bubbled up, as bright and unexpected as the emotions Earth had taught her. By Luminan standards? Absolutely not. Our relationship defies all logical parameters. She traced the line of his jaw, memorizing every detail of his face. But I've learned that the most important discoveries happen when we abandon parameters altogether. 6 months became a year, then 2. Lyra's reports to Lumina grew increasingly persuasive, backed by genuine scientific breakthroughs that she and Elijah produced together, their different perspectives creating innovations neither culture could have developed alone. Gradually, her extraction orders were extended indefinitely, her role formalized as cultural and scientific liaison to Earth. On quiet nights, they still visited the observatory roof, looking up at the distant galaxy she once called home. Sometimes Lyra would activate her true appearance, her skin glowing with constellations that matched the stars above. Sometimes they would simply be two scientists, two lovers, planning a future that neither of their worlds had imagined possible. Do you ever regret it? Elijah asked one night, 3 years after she'd first arrived. Choosing Earth over Lumina? Lyra considered the question with the thoroughness of her scientific training. She thought of the life she'd left behind, ordered, logical, emotionless. Then she looked at the man beside her, at the world that had taught her to feel, to taste, to love. Scientifically speaking, she said, leaning in to kiss him beneath the vast tapestry of stars that connected their worlds, it was the only logical conclusion. As their lips met, Lyra reflected that her most important discovery on Earth wasn't about human relationships at all, it was about the vast, beautiful universe that exists within a single heart when it opens to the impossible. Across galaxies and species, beyond all scientific parameters, some connections transcended explanation. They simply were, as constant and luminous as the stars themselves.